Well, hello and welcome to another episode of My Counselor Live, where we get to hear from our counselors, discuss trending topics, and answer some questions that have been submitted to us. I'm your host, Matthew Thror, and joining me today is one of our clinicians here at MCO, Tara Riggs. Hi, Tara. How are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great. So good to be with you today.
Glad that you are joining us. So before we get into an article that you wrote, would you introduce yourself to our audience and just tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, so as Matthew said, I am Tara Riggs, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Florida, and I live around the Pensacola area in the Panhandle of Florida. Been a therapist now for about 4 years, and I'm a clinical supervisor on the team, which means that I get the pleasure of kind of training up newer clinicians to do great therapy so that we can, as we're always pursuing excellence for our king and our clients, and I get to be a part of that mission at MCO, both for the clients and on the therapist end. So I love getting to do that, both of those roles.
That's awesome. Tara, I want to dive into an article that you wrote. So I want to tell everyone listening or watching, if you are newlyweds, you've been married for a while, or you're kind of in that stage, if you're about to get married, I want you to really pay attention because we have some good stuff coming. The article that you wrote is what to expect in your first session for marital communications. Tara, what inspired you to write this article?
Yeah, so this was an article that kind of came on our radar as a leadership team, just really wanting clients to know what to expect. So we actually wrote a whole series of these articles. So there's what to expect in individual counseling and infidelity work. And so there's a whole series of these. And I got the pleasure of writing the marriage communication article. And because we don't want anyone to kind of come into counseling, I think sometimes we maybe unknowingly come into counseling a little bit resistant, a little hesitant, kind of, and it's okay to feel out the waters, right? To test out the waters. We want to kind of see, we want to kind of test out the therapist, see if it's a good fit for us. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. But if we can you can come in kind of with this knowledge of, this is who the kind of person I'm going to be sitting with. This is what the process is going to look like. That there's that kind of automatically, there's some tension and some stress that really kind of decreases when you know what to expect, right? And so that's really kind of the heart behind the article, is to just be able to equip our clients to kind of to know what they're going to get.
Yeah, that's good. So, and funny because last week was what to expect in fertility. That was last week's episode. So glad we're doing this back to back. Can you tell us, like, did you have somebody in mind, or did the leadership team have somebody in mind when they were kind of planning this ahead? Who was this article written for?
Yeah, so this article is written for anybody who's coming in for couples counseling. And so in couples counseling, and I'll say, because we offer sex therapy, we offer premarital counseling, we offer couples, like kind of just communication, like kind of marital distress kind of counseling. And so this particular article is written, it's kind of really the foundation for all of those, I will say, because there's kind of variations for sex therapy, and there's variations for infidelity. But who we are as therapists, and kind of the way that we see people, and like the issues that people bring into us is really the same across the board. And so so this particular article is written for really any couple. And so I say that from anyone who is in a premarital kind of space, where they're kind of wanting to equip themselves and be prepared to have a good and strong and healthy marriage, that they are going to benefit from reading this article. Anyone who is in a place of, hey, things are kind of just starting to get a little bit off course, right? We're starting to feel that things are getting off track. We really are trying to connect, and just notice that maybe we keep getting in the same kind of cycles or arguments and that kind of thing. And so, we're just really struggling to connect right now. And there's certain seasons of life that are harder on couples than others, specifically like the bringing home baby kind of stage of life can be really hard as we're learning to be parents. There can be, grief, and, whether that's from infertility or from death or loss. Those are all things that are going to be stressful for the marriage. And so it can be couples that are just kind of going through a stressful season. Or you've also got those couples that are kind of, just kind of got one foot out the door, right? That they have tried everything that they know to try. They've thrown kind of the whole kitchen sink at it that they know to be able to fix their marriage and have not been able to. And so counseling is kind of like a last ditch effort, right? That we're desperate, but we are just a hair step away from divorce. Right. And so really this article is for anyone who is seeking couples therapy.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you mentioned that researcher, the marriage researcher. I can't remember his name, but he said
John
that yep, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
On average, it takes a couple 6 years before they get into counseling.
Right. Which my heart as a therapist just breaks for that, because when you've been stuck in a cycle for 6 years and not able to connect, one, not only is that incredibly painful because we are created for connection. And so the isolation is so painful. And so my heart aches for the individuals who are just, all of that pain is just building for them. And then also the lost time, kind of the wasted years, right? When we could have been connecting if we would have gotten the help. And so I encourage anybody who's watching this to don't wait. If you're struggling, don't wait. Don't be that average couple that's coming in 6 years and being in a place of distress. Come in preventatively. I have a couple that I'm working with right now who are, have been married for 2 years, and they're just starting to see their cycle start to emerge. They're starting to notice when they disconnect, and that we don't know how to do this. We don't know how to get to a place of connection. And I am able to do so much more and go so much deeper with a couple who is already connected than I am with a couple who is, so disconnected. We just have to get them to connection before we can really help them to heal, to really heal from all kinds of the wounds that life just brings with us.
That's good. So I want to talk about a little bit more in your article. You explain 3 questions that will be asked in the first session. Would you mind just kind of walking us through that? Can you explain these questions for us?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So the first one is, what's brought you into counseling and whose idea was it? So one, we essentially kind of will ask the question like, why counseling and why now? That tells us a lot about kind of the current status of things. Who initiates it is actually important too, because typically, that person is going to be very invested in the relationship. They're going to be really sometimes what we call the pursuer in the relationship can be the one sometimes that is going to reach for the counseling because they want to get help. They want to connect. And then, it's also helpful for us to know maybe who is going to be more resistant in the counseling process. And as a therapist, that's important to me because I want both people bought in. I want to make sure that I develop an alliance and a strong, healthy relationship with both people, regardless of who's making the appointment. But it's good for me. It's good information for me to know, just in terms of who might be kind of pushing for the connection more so. Yeah. The second question is, how's your relationship evolved over time, and how did we get to this place of concern? I love the first part of that question is, how has it evolved over time? Because I want to know what attracted you to each other to be in the beginning. What were the things like, where were the sparks flying and the fireworks were going off? I want to know about that, because those are all of the things that sometimes when we're in these cycles, we forget about. Right. And so it's helpful for me to know what they kind of found in each other, what they were interested in each other. But it's also helpful for the couple to remember, what was it like when we were connected. And sometimes just talking about it can kind of bring some of those feelings back online. And so that's, it's kind of helpful on both parts. And then the second half of that question is, how did we get to this place of concern? Like, this evolved. It usually doesn't necessarily come out of nowhere. That usually disconnection evolves over time. Now, that's not always the case, because sometimes, like I said, there's season of life things like the bringing home baby or the grief and loss that are going to kind of be thrown out of left field, where we didn't really see this coming and it kind of came on all of a sudden. Other times, this is a cycle that's evolved. It's a problem that's gotten worse over time. It's kind of eroded our connection over time. And so we want to kind of pay attention to that. Kind of, where did this start? What was the onset, if you will, or the event that kind of caused this domino effect or this ripple effect of disconnection in the relationship? Right, that's important. It's also important to know how long a couple has been in this cycle. Typically, the longer that we're in a cycle, the more kind of we get a little bit dug in. We get kind of rigid in terms of, well, this is what I want versus this is what I want. And the longer we're in a cycle, it's going to take some more time to get out of that cycle. So I also want to know, and when I'm asking that question, how did we get here? I'm also paying attention to how long have we been in this cycle, because that's going to tell me kind of, maybe that's going to help me to kind of determine how long it's going to take for us to get out of this cycle, right? The longer we're in it, the longer it's going to take to get out of it. Mm-hmm. And then the third piece is, if you got everything that you wanted out of counseling, what would you want to be different on the other side of it? And that's kind of just my way of asking, or our way of asking, what are your goals, right? What are you wanting to get out of it? What, if you could kind of paint a picture and imagine life without the issues that we have right now, and as we want it to be, I need to know, as the therapist, where are we starting and where are we going? And I want to join with my clients' goals and help them get to where they want to be, not where I want them to be necessarily, right? But I want to help them to get where they want to be. And that's important, that we are all on the same page in terms of, from the beginning, in terms of where we're going.
That's good. I was going to stop you after second question,
Sure,
but you were on a roll, so I didn't want to stop you.
Yeah,
but I appreciate you mentioning, how these problems evolve over time. And it reminded me of the Song of Solomon too, about when he talks about watch for the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards.
Yeah.
And it just seems like it's always the little things that over time just begin to chop away at what was healthy at one time,
Sure.
Yeah. So I wanted to throw that in there.
And I would say too, Matt, that it's not, it is the foxes, it's the little things, but it's also how we deal with the little things, right? Because, I will say to my couples all the time, it's not about how we made the bed. That might be what we're fighting about, but it's not really about how we made the bed, right? That's the content of what we're fighting about. Right. But what it's really rubbing up against is, what does that mean about me? And what does that say about you? And what does that say about this marriage? Right. It's the meaning that we make of the bed. Right. And it's the wounds that gets bumped up against from our childhood stuff that attributes to the way that we make meaning of the bed being made incorrectly. Right. So there's so many pieces to it, right? But it's the little things. It's the bed not being made correctly. That's the little thing, but that's the trigger, right? That's the trigger for these big nasty cycles that get created around things that really are so small.
Yeah, that's really good. I want to use that in a sermon, I think. So
feel free to steal it. This is public access.
Right. Yeah. Right. So tell us, what's maybe some final advice you can give to couples who are watching this?
Sure. Well, I guess I'll kind of reiterate what I had said earlier, which is, don't wait. That's my passion, is just that if you have reached your own end, your own limit in terms of what you can do to make your marriage better, let us help you. It is what we are. It's what we love to do. It's what we were trained to do. It's what the Lord has gifted us to do. Like, let us help you. I often say to my clients, I believe that God created us with limitations so that we would have to reach and ask for our needs to be met by another person, because we are created to live in community. We are not created to be self-sufficient islands. And so this is one of the ways that the body of Christ works together, right? Is that you have reached your end, right? But that just happens to be where my gifting and my skill set is, right? So let's be the body of Christ in that, right? And let yourself be enriched, and let the giftings that God has given me kind of be a help to you. And I'm sure that you're going to benefit the body of Christ somewhere else, right? Because that's just kind of the way that it all works. And so, yeah, your limitation is it is an invitation. Your limitation is an invitation to connect, right? And to be one and be in unity in the body of Christ.
Tara, you preaching.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's
that's
my
good.
heart,
That's
it's my
good.
passion. You can probably tell, but I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah.
Yeah. And don't be the average that waits 6 years. You know,
Mhm.
as a pastor, and I'm sure, you know, you mentioned that, you touched on that earlier, you
Mhm.
know, how much more work we have to get to if you know, to get to the issues, if you wait 6 years.
Yeah, right.
Do the preventative stuff. Yeah, I
Mhm.
like that so much. That's really good.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
Is there anything else you want to add to it? I mean, that was
Yeah,
some
I
really good
mean,
stuff.
yeah, that's kind of my heart on my sleeve. So that's all of it. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like it. Thank you so much, Tara, for sharing and just writing that article. And yeah, we just appreciate you coming on and discussing that. I want us to transition into a section that we love to do here at My Counselor Online, where we like to kind of dive into what's happening in our culture. Uh, and so we like to talk about and discuss trending topics, what's trending in our world today. And something that popped up on our radar was the topic of boundaries in marriage. So let's just kind of, I'm going to ask you a few questions about boundaries in marriage, and we'll just see what you have to say for us.
Sure.
So Tara, should there be boundaries in a marriage?
Absolutely, which is it's a great question. And I think that as something that kind of it's revealing how people even answer that question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes we think there should be no boundaries in marriage, and it's complete oneness, right? And I do believe that obviously God created for the two to become one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet at the same time, He created us as individuals, right? We were individuals. We were me before we became we, and that there is
Mm-hmm.
still space within the marriage relationship for both of those. And so, what happens? And so I will answer the question, Vish, by saying, yes, there should be boundaries in marriage, because what happens is if we don't have boundaries, what happens is that the entire relationship really becomes really toxic and really unhealthy, because we end up making ourselves responsible for the other person, right? We become
Mm-hmm.
responsible for, if there's no boundary between, my husband and myself, and I make myself responsible for my husband's, his thoughts, his goals, his emotions, then I'm going to exhaust myself meeting his needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I'm not aware of is whatever resistance is or whatever's happening inside of him, that perhaps he's not able to receive that. So each of us being responsible for ourselves, which is what boundaries is all about, is I'm the only person that can know what I'm feeling or thinking in a given moment. I'm the only person who knows what my goals and my desires or what my giftings are, right? Only I can know that. My spouse only, we know that through communication,
Mm-hmm.
but that is what God has put in me, right? And that when I might be getting into your next questions. So I want to slow down a little bit, because I know there's some
Okay.
kind of some follow-up questions. But
Yeah.
yes, let me give you the short answer is should there be boundaries in marriage? Absolutely. It keeps
Mm-hmm.
both people healthy. When we know where I end and my spouse begins, then I know what I'm responsible for. If that gets
Yeah.
really muddy, right? If those lines get real blurred, then I become responsible for too much. I don't know what's mine and what's his. Resentment can build, right? If I feel like that person should be taking care of me, resentment's going to build up inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, right, so there's a lot of problems that can come from either becoming responsible for the other person or expecting the other person to become responsible for me. Right.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to a whole world of issues that kind of that creates whenever we don't have healthy boundaries.
Yeah. So, and I think you were about to get into this. So how do you know if you have healthy boundaries in your marriage, and really, what does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. So just, I want to kind of plug this, there's a book called Boundaries in Marriage. It's by Henry Cloud and John Townsend, and it's fantastic. And so I just want to kind of plug that as we're talking about this. But part of that is that, we do have to know, what is ours and what's not ours. So in that book, he talks about our boundary is our fence line, right? So if I'm the house and my fence line is my boundary, so that's the things that I'm responsible for. right? My thoughts, my feelings, my dreams, my experiences, my background, all of these things. And my husband or my spouse has the exact same thing, right? And so what healthy boundaries look like is it's okay that as I just mentioned at the end of the last section, it's okay if I bump up against my limitation. That limitation is there on purpose. It's put there by God, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that gives me an opportunity to ask for what I need from my spouse. And that is from what I see is the place that people struggle the most is one, oh my gosh, I have a limitation. I have something I've bumped up against the end of myself. And in our world, in America, it is hard for us. That is a hard place for us because we want to believe that we can do it all and that we're self-sufficient and that we're independent and we don't need nobody, right? I'm just going to do me, right? But that is not how God's created us. And so we will inevitably bump up against the end of ourselves. And one, that's hard. And then when we do that, we also have to ask for what we need. And that is the place that is really hard, is when we reach when we feel like I didn't put that boundary up, but that's just the end of me, right? That is my boundary because that's all I've got. That's all I've got to give. And then in that place, we humble ourselves, right? And we ask for what we need from our spouse. And the hard part is our spouse has an option there. They can either say, yes, I can do that for you, right? And they can meet that need and we feel cared for and we feel loved. But sometimes they're at their own limit and they say no. And that then puts that need back on ourselves. Okay, so now my husband can't meet this need for me. So where do I go with this need? What do I do with it? Right? And we are responsible for that, not him, right? I might get upset. I might feel a little angry or frustrated that my spouse can't meet my need in that moment, right? But that's because I'm making them responsible for me, which is not healthy. And so in that moment, then I think, okay, so what do I need in this? What do I need? And where do I go with this need? Is this something that God can meet for me? Is this something that I turn to a trusted friend with? Is this something that I just need to, that I can meet for myself? Right. And so that is what healthy boundaries in marriage looks like.
Yeah, that's good. So maybe if a couple's listening to this or someone's listening to this or watching this and they're thinking to themselves, I don't have boundaries in my relationship with my spouse. What's some advice you can give to that person or really to that couple who doesn't have those boundaries in their relationship?
Yeah, great question. My first advice would be to start saying no. To start saying no. Oftentimes we live in a culture, as I mentioned, where not only do we prize independence and self-sufficiency, but we also don't ever want to be mean to anybody. And the other kind of another category of people, right, is the people pleasers, that we say yes to everybody, or the yes man, right, as we've heard it called, right? We say yes to everybody about everything, but guess what? We are operating in life out of an empty tank. We have nothing. We're trying to give out of an empty cistern, as Jeremiah might call it, right? We've got this empty cistern, right? We've got nothing to give. Everything that we have is just kind of flowing out of us. And we are trying to meet everyone else's needs. And so part of the way that we start having boundaries is we start putting up this boundary around us and we have to say, no, I can't do that for you, right? That my first priority is actually to take care of myself. And that when I am taking care of myself and I am receiving God's love for myself and I'm taking care of myself, that actually fills me up to be able to do the work of the gospel, to be able to go and to be able to love people well, not out of bitterness and resentment and hoping that they're going to reciprocate to me, right? But instead, I'm doing it from a place of fullness and I'm pouring out of my fullness. So the answer is we have to start saying no. Brene Brown says that we create boundaries so that we don't resent those we love. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. We have to start saying no.
Yeah. And can we plug the book one more time? It's called Setting Boundaries. Yep. Is that right? It's
called Boundaries in Marriage. There's a whole series of boundaries books by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend are their names. And the single boundaries book is just called Boundaries. Is fantastic, but then they also wrote one specifically for marriage called Boundaries in Marriage.
Yeah, so that's a good resource for everyone listening. then go pick that up. I'm sure on Amazon, pretty cheap. So
That's right.
cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us and talking about that trending topic. I'd like to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk through some questions that have been submitted. So here at My Counselor Online, we love getting your questions, and we love answering those questions on our live episodes. And these two questions that we have that I'm going to ask you, Tara, these have already been submitted, and you can actually go submit a question at MyCounselor.Online/ask. And maybe in a future episode, we'll be able to get to those questions and answer those. And your name will remain private. We want to respect that. And so let's get into our first question. Our first question today says, how can I heal to view marriage as a good thing that can be possible for me one day? And this writer writes, my parents' marriage was far from a good example.
Oh man, I just noticed so much just compassion for this person. And also saying that I get it, right? Kind of on an experiential level, in that some of us have been passed down this kind of beautiful Christian legacy, right? Where it's like, oh, my parents and my grandparents, and, we were passed down stability and security and confidence and healthy, secure attachment with our love, with our parents, and others of us were not, right? We were passed down. We came from broken families, and we were passed down a lot of kind of dysfunction, if we're honest. And so I would say that that's the work, right? How do we heal our view of marriage is to heal ourselves. Can we acknowledge that not only did my parents have not a great marriage, but that has affected me, that has impacted me, and that will impact your future marriage to the extent that you neglect the work on yourself, right? So in other words, what I'm saying is do the work to heal, because that marriage, your parents' relationship, had everything to do with the person you are today, whether you know it or not. And that the best thing that you can do for your future marriage is to do the work on yourself to heal those wounds and those pains. And so that you are the best version of your relationship, that you're the best version of yourself for your relationship, and to encourage that process. And, whoever your prospective partner might be, down the road, to encourage that for them as well, right? That we are not going to be ashamed of counseling, that we're not going to be ashamed of our stuff, right? Because the truth is we all have it, just not everybody talks about it. Not everybody's aware of it, right? And so if we can engage with ourselves from a place of honesty and transparency, then we will create relationships in which honesty and transparency are the foundation as well. And that is a healthy marriage.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Heal yourself, work on yourself. And sometimes that comes, like you were talking about earlier, your limitations on that is an invitation.
Right.
So this is where we invite therapists, counselors to come in and help us with that. Thank you for that, Tara. That was good. Our second question on today's episode: what advice would you give to a couple who is struggling with infertility and is feeling emotionally exhausted?
Well, yeah, and Matthew, kind of as I was sharing with you, that my husband and I have walked through infertility ourselves. And I wasn't a therapist at the time, and there are lots of things that I knew and lots of things that I didn't know, and things I would have done differently. Looking back, and this is what I would offer to anyone who's walking through this, is to keep your relationship healthy and strong, right? To not allow the prospect of a child to come between this existing relationship between you. We want to be shoulder to shoulder in the work. We want to keep our kind of that best friendship at the forefront, right? And not allow wanting to have a child to come between us. And part of what I would say to that too is that not being able to conceive is a grief process in and of itself, right? That is, there is a loss in that for us. And so what I would say is that everyone grieves differently. And it is so important for us not to judge the way the other person grieves, to know that it's going to look different. Grief is not a linear process. It's kind of all over the place. And so we might be in, I might be in a stage of bargaining while my spouse is in a stage of anger. And I don't want to judge that just because we're not on the same page about kind of where we are with this process. So I think one is being really open to each other's experiences, having a lot of empathy for each other in this process, right? We want our relationship to be a resource to us in going through this hard thing, as opposed to the relationship somehow becoming a threat to my conceiving a child, right? We kind of want to keep the relationship together, right? And that's really the priority, and that I can pull from a secure and safe marriage, that becomes a resource to me in my grieving process, right? And keeping the relationship strong, that the only way for the relationship to be a resource to me in my grief is if I keep that relationship strong, right? Keeping that there. And so I can pull from my husband, I can pull from our connection and our marriage in order to walk through this hard thing. As opposed to, if I push him away, I isolate myself. Right? If we push each other away, then we isolate ourselves. Now we're walking through suffering, and we're walking through it alone, which is the worst combination.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Tara, it's been such an honor and pleasure having you on our episode today. I know I've taken a lot just for myself. And I'm sure the listeners and viewers have taken a lot. So thank you for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. And for those of you watching and listening, I want to say thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. And again, if you have questions, we would love for you to submit those. Just simply go to MyCounselor.Online/ask, and it'll be on the screen in front of you also. I also want to invite you to check out our social media sites and our YouTube channel. A lot of free resources out there on our YouTube channel, and just for you to watch or for you to share. Maybe you see something that's on our YouTube channel that somebody's going through. Feel free to subscribe and like our page. Our Facebook and Instagram handle is Love My Counselor. Again, Love My Counselor. And for YouTube, you just search for My Counselor Online Christian Counseling. And again, go like the page, go subscribe to it, and hit that little notification bell for all of our content that's out there. And again, thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Tara, for joining us. And we will see you again next week for another episode of My Counselor Live. Take care.